The new season is here for World of Tanks console, Dark Realm, and with it brings a brand new World War II vehicle with a brand new mechanic for World War II, at least with regards to the tank type it is, this light tank. The VZ68 Squall features a brand new start of a tech tree that may be incoming into the game with Czechoslovakian light tanks, and this one features a massively fast loading main armament. This is a very small damaging main armament, and to be honest is not particularly the most effective main armament in the game, as you can probably expect, with this main armament only dealing 6 damage if you're loading premium rounds and 8 damage if you're loading standard rounds. So it's quite a decent chunk of damage lost if you do decide to actually downgrade from 8 to 6. You know, you're losing 25% of your DPM right there. And when the tank itself does not have very high DPM of 2100, it feels a little bit lackluster. And also the fact that you're having to fire off like 300 rounds in order to deal a decent chunk of damage in one go, it really isn't that fun. So you have 100 shots in your clip and they each do, you know, 8 damage if you're loading AP, so you have a maximum potential damage of 800 with AP with 182 pen, which against some of the heavy tanks at tier 8, tier 9, you know, can be a little bit of a struggle from the front if you're aiming at weak points. And with the bloom that you get when using such a fast firing gun, you cannot actually fully aim after each one of those tiny little bursts in the intra clip, because you got 0.04 of a second before the next shell is fired. 0.04 of a second. It is just so quick to burst out this, and when you're actually taking time to aim, it can be a bit of a pain, and so you are probably not going to be able to get off an entire clip against someone unless maybe you're fighting very up close and personal with a lot of the tanks that have no armor. So something like a Grilla 15, you're looking at the Borsigs, the artillery pieces, maybe then you're going to be able to get a full clip off, but at ranges even like a couple of those shells are going to miss, and so you're going to end up missing a lot of your shots, a lot of the potential damage. So the effective DPM of this tank is actually far lower than what it says right here, 2100. It's actually way lower than that when you're actually rolling around in this tank. And so to have a good game, you are going to have to do far more consistent than something like a Batchat 12T, which only has to fire off 4 of its shells to deal 600, well, 700, something like that. I think it's 600, and oh, it does 170 damage, I believe, and so you're doing 680 damage, which is only 130 less. But this thing is obviously going to be able to land each 4 of those shells with pretty reliable accuracy versus something like the Squall, which is definitely not going to be able to do that. This tank is also massive, so you do have some downsides when it comes to a lot of the other light tanks. So for example, this is the side profile of the HM AMX-58, and this is the side profile of the Squall. Yeah, you're basically playing a medium at this point. And the other downside is you're not very fast. You turn like an absolute boat, as you can probably expect with such a gigantic boat-shaped size looking hull. It almost looks like an amphibious vehicle, which it may well be. But this thing is definitely not moving and shifting around very fast. It also has no armor, so obviously as a light tank you're not expecting armor, but it doesn't have any armor, so you are getting penned by everything very reliably. And even with the HE rounds against these things, you're getting penned. HP wise, you do have slightly more than a lot of the others, but that's probably due to the fact that you are a bigger vehicle. And so although you get, you know, 10% more hit points than something like a Batchat 12T, you are also like double the size of the Batchat 12T. You're more likely to get hit. You're less maneuverable, so you can't dodge shells as easily. You can't scoot in and kind of farm up some damage and then leave as easily. You're going to probably get caught for doing that. And so this really does become a vehicle that is really an executioner in the game, you know, coming in, dealing all of that damage to a tank that you can 100% finish off, and then being able to leave without taking any damage. Because if you're taking, you know, 300, 400 shells every single time that you do that, you can only do that 3 times in the game. And if you're only dealing like 600 damage, you can only do a maximum potential of like 1800. And whilst this tank does have some decent attributes, like the fact that it can deal such a decent amount of damage in one go, and it has fairly consistent spotting range, which is pretty darn good. You know, comparing it to the other light tanks is actually reasonably good, and the detectability of the squall is actually reasonably good as well. However, you know, it's basically going to be slightly worse than something like a Batchat 12T, just simply because of the fact that you can put on camo. This thing's much smaller, you can hide in bushes easier, you know, parts of your tank aren't going to be poking out of the bush, which can then be spotted by the opponents, and so that really does make this tank in the lower echelon of true light tanks when it comes to the game. Now, I've ran the tank with a couple of different setups to see what kind of worked out best. The first one was with a full camo crew, because we got the recent changes, which was actually really interesting to try out some of the new equipment, and the introduction of binoculars alongside the camouflage net, which is really interesting to use both at once, because your view range and your detectability really do go into the absolute floor, and so it feels amazing. However, obviously this is the still concealment value, so if we were to take off, for example, the camo net, it doesn't, it changes a little bit, so you have to actually be stationary when you're using the camo net. So whilst it is good, you do have to be stationary, and in a tank that is such a big chunky boy, it's a little bit harder to stay stationary and not get detected. So I would actually favor taking something like the additional grousers just for increased hull rotation speed, because that is really where this tank is let down. This speed getting up to top speed is fine, so your engine power is actually fine. It has like 27 power to weight ratio, so that isn't a problem, but it's more the turning speed. It feels like a slug, and it plays like a slug as well. And so when you're playing around in this tank, if you're thinking about buying it, you're thinking about spending the 6,000 gold that it does cost you to actually purchase this vehicle, it is one of those that I think is, if you love light tanks, you enjoy playing light tanks, and you want something a bit different, then yes, 100% go ahead and get this thing. It's going to be the cheapest that you can buy a tier 8 light tank for at least a decent period of time. But if you're not really interested in light tanks and you're thinking about dipping your toes in, this probably isn't the tank for you, and it's probably going to put you off playing light tanks in general, because it does not really have the features. It's like playing a medium that is pretending to be a light. So yeah, it's a bit of a strange one, and it certainly isn't very good, to be honest. It is probably lower than average in terms of its competitiveness within the game. You definitely, as a more experienced player, feel like you're on the back foot just by picking this vehicle over playing something like a Batchat 12T, an EOC even 90, basically any of the other light tanks in the game. So it does put it at a significant disadvantage, but that's not to say that it isn't fun, because fun, I have had a ton of fun with this vehicle. It's really, really interesting. It's lovely to play a vehicle that is a bit different, and I actually think Wargaming should do more of this sort of stuff. It does really, really well at those close range engagements where you do find vehicles from the side. Its penetration with its premium rounds is actually very, very good. So you can consistently deal all of your shells of damage to something like a Tiger Mouse. I did it a few times, and you'll see that in the gameplays coming up. But the issue is, obviously, you're not doing that consistently from the front, and there's not that many opportunities, especially if you're not that experienced at staying alive and you're a typical YOLO light tank. This is not going to be the one for you, and you're going to get removed very quickly with doing like 100 damage, because if you don't pen, or you only pen a few of your shells, you're only damaging for 8 damage or 6 damage depending on the round that you're firing. So yeah, it feels very, very bad. But it does have HE rounds, which may actually be worth taking if you do find other vehicles that are lightly armored, things like gorillas. It could be worth loading a clip, because you can deal double the damage of the AP, so you can deal 1600 damage in a clip with the HE. So I'm going to be running that, at least in this vehicle, just one singular clip, so taking in, maybe we'll take 200 rounds, because yeah, that should be fine. And then, yeah, that is basically how this tank kind of plays from the stats perspective. It is on the back foot compared to a lot of the other light tanks, but it's a ton of fun to play. So let's jump in and have a look at what this tank plays like in game. I'll showcase off what you can do. And yeah, just be aware, these are not the gameplay that I had all the way through. There were a couple of really bad games where you just kind of get shafted by if you have a bad team, you can't really carry at all in this tank compared to some of the other light tanks. And so you can just get steamrolled, especially when there's multiple opponents trying to track you down. So let's jump in now. So first up on the chopping block, Procarovka. This was a really fun game. I enjoyed it because it is your typical light tank gameplay on Procarovka. However, light tanks have been in probably the worst place possible, especially on maps like this, because although you might see on World of Tanks PC or some of the other variants, I don't know what Blitz is like for Procarovka and bushes and concealment. On console, there is a significantly reduced amount of foliage. There is a lot less bushes. There is a lot less opportunity for you to actually remain undetected. The view range of tanks on console is far higher than what you would see on PC, and it just generally feels like that. That is how you are going to find when you do decide to jump into the light tank class. It is not really anywhere near the same. The amount of foliage on this main road, there's just gaps in it. There's lots more gaps in it. There's areas where even if you're in a bush, you can still get spotted by like medium tanks and stuff like that, which just feels diabolical. When you're in such a big tank like this, you can't really play those spots reliably. And so it feels kind of bad. But obviously we've started off the game, we've basically broke even on the amount of damage that we've done versus received, but you can kind of see the bloom there. It's very difficult on those slimmer shots where you maybe only see the turret of a vehicle that you can pen, and so you often end up missing or like not being able to hit all of them, or maybe you only hit a quarter of them, and so you're dealing like 200 damage maybe in a burst, or maybe you're dealing 100 damage in a burst. And yeah, it really is not particularly too fun in that department. But as the game goes on, those opportunities to deal a lot more damage, this really is one of those that just gets infinitely better as time goes on, because you can single out opponents, you can, you know, use your view range and spotting. And if you are a light tank player, you have been struggling to play light tanks, or you're just thinking about getting into light tanks, the best thing that you can do is survive. Surviving, playing a bit more passive, making sure that you're not doing stupid things to try and get in, like, you know, 200 damage or 300 damage, regardless of if you're playing the squall or not. You know, just not doing silly things at the beginning is going to make you go from like a terrible light tank player that gets taken out within 2 minutes to someone that can, you know, deal similar sorts of damage that you can get in a normal tank as time goes on. Light tanks always get better as the game goes on, typically, unless it's like a steamroll, but like, you know, that it doesn't really count, because any tank is pretty bad if it's a steamroll game, you know, 10 of against 1 or whatever. But when you find those sorts of engagements, those games where you do hold back a bit, you learn a lot more, you see where the openings are. Even if you don't take them, you go, ah, damn it, I wish I took that opening, I could have potentially played there. Or maybe you did try and take the opening and it didn't work out, but you're always learning that sort of thing. Whereas I see a lot of light tank players, you know, just YOLOing in, trying to get the arty or something stupid like that, or just YOLOing the first tank that they see that they can pen, because it's, I can pen that tank, blah, blah, blah. And they just YOLO in and waste all of their hit points. But as you see, we have only done 159 damage at this point in the game. Pretty darn bad. But we've caught ourselves a lurver out in the side. Obviously not penned all of those. Some of those missed. And so we only got an extra 400 damage there, basically, for, well, like maybe 500 instead of the 800 we could have done. And they were pretty much all aimed where they should have been on the lurver, roughly. It's just luck of the draw because we're further away, whether like a decent chunk of them hit or they miss or whatever. And whilst you can take things like vertical stabilizers, it doesn't really help you with this tank as much as some of the other tanks, because of the fact that a lot of the time when you're fully unloading, you do want to actually aim. And so when you're unloading, the issue is not necessarily the overall accuracy when you're moving, but more so the bloom. The bloom is what causes these tanks to have to be negatively impacted by accuracy. So obviously, if we skip forward a little bit, you'll see what I'm talking about with the bloom, and also some funky things that happen. So as you see there, I didn't think that we were actually gonna hit the SU, and there's kind of like a little delay when you actually hit to a degree, because the shell travel speed of this thing is pretty bad. And so we didn't think, oh, well, I didn't think that we were actually hitting that guy. So we then managed to actually do it. And then so I switched back and then finished him off. But it's one of those things that this tank has a little funky, unique thing. And there's also one other thing that I wanted to talk about with this tank, which is that the damage drops or the penetration drop off with this tank is really, really bad as we come around against lava. Definitely no penetration drop off when we're this close. You can see we're just going around the lava, going for some damage in this game. And you have to play off a couple of risky strats when you do play. So we're going to take the little area here. This is where the turning speed is quite slow. And you lose a lot of your momentum as you turn with this tank. And so I've come up to this point. There is some tanks behind me. I'm hoping that the team will push up and try and get them. Luckily, we bounce around from behind. And at this time, I'm thinking, right, this is bad. Our team aren't pushing. They're not trying to find out where the other tanks on the left-hand side of the map actually are. And so let's just pull back. We'll go find where the last two remaining vehicles are over on the left, which is an artillery and the Kanonen Jagdpanzer. And then we'll swing back around, maybe finish off the lava, and then maybe go up to the hill, finish those guys off. Sometimes the best thing to do is to disengage, especially if the enemy team know where you are, and then come in and surprise them. Now, obviously, there were a couple of tanks over here. I know that the Kanonen's over here. I know that the artillery's over here. So maybe there's someone else. I wasn't entirely keeping track during the replay, but during the game I definitely was. And so I was pretty confident coming over here. But as we go through, we then obviously spot the artillery. We can just fire in an AP. This is where HE would have been nice because we could pen that guy and basically remove him twice as quick. So instead of 4 seconds to deal like 800 damage, we'd have been dealing the same amount of damage in 2 seconds and then had a decent amount left. And then we probably could have penned the Kanonen Jagdpanzer with the HE as well. But obviously we're going to come up from behind him. We do a little duck and weave and then we finish him off as well. And whilst we were doing that, some of the other tanks on the right hand side of the map have been taken out. We're up to 2.3k damage with 1600 assists, which is by no means bad at all. But hopefully this guy's on a decent chunk of health. If not, not a problem. But it'd be nice to get, you know, another 500 or something like that if we possibly could. Now, one thing that you see me doing here is just making sure that we avoid the cap circle. As soon as you go into the cap circle, it alerts the opponent that there's someone in the cap circle. So they're going to look over towards the cap circle if they have any level of like skill or just like think about it at all. If that's the only area they can get hit from, they're going to turn and they're going to look at the cap circle. So we don't want to go in there. And so we avoid it. Come around and unfortunately the guy only had like 100 damage on him left. And we finish off the game with 2.5k with 1600 assists. And we can move on into the next replay though. Next replay, El Halluf. This one is a replay that I picked mainly because of the fact that, you know, we're kind of showcasing against more heavily armored vehicles. And when you don't get such an open map, obviously Procarovka, probably one of the best open maps for singling out targets. Albeit it's not actually as good as you might think for a light tank. Because of the fact that often you're doing a lot less damage and view range and the foliage is nowhere near like it is on PC. So for a light tank, it's not actually as good as you might think. And actually some of the other more hilly maps are better. But we come here, I'm thinking, we'll go for some damage on this guy. It's a bad play by me. Really, I was just hoping that we catch his track and then we can fully unload into him. But we aren't able to. We pull back, and AMBT auto-aims me or swings around and tries to put a shot into me. Either way, missing. And then we have currently done 132 damage. So this is kind of not an ideal situation. We've taken, what, like 230 damage or something in the return for 130. Ideally, every hit point that you have should be traded 2 for 1. That is kind of my aim. That's where you're having a good game. If you're having a good game, you're doing twice as much damage as every hit point on your vehicle. So a good game, like a decent game, would be 2,200 damage in this tank. And if you can consistently do that over every single game that you're playing in the tank, you're probably going to get 2 marks. And then assistance damage comes into play as well. So, you know, sometimes you'll have games where you don't really do that much damage, but you do, you know, I don't know, 500, 1,000, 3,000, 4,000 assistance damage. That's really where it comes in clutch. Now, you'll note that there is an artillery on the enemy team, and for some reason he has his has something against me in this game. I don't quite know why, but he will only pick me during this game. I guess he's one of those that you know, likes to watch Pokemon or something with the I choose you, because that's what happened in this game. Very fun, as you can probably expect, when you're playing a light tank and the artillery decides not to shoot anyone else except from you, even in stupid positions where they should never fire and you're not going to hit in an artillery. He still tries, but we can make it work either way. And when I got hit, well, got focused twice in a row, I was thinking, this could turn into one of those games. And so, yeah, not particularly too fussed on that. But obviously, we're coming up from behind. The delay between where you're firing and where you're hitting, there is quite a slow shell travel speed. So we need to really pre-aim where your shells are going to be. And you kind of have to move as you go with a tank like this, because if you don't and tanks are moving, you just end up missing way too many of your shots. You have to basically be perfect with how you're moving their ways, and as you can see, it's very, very difficult to do reliably. It is much easier when you have a much bigger tank or something from the side or whatever, but it is a bit of a pain in the backside. So you can see the artillery, you know, going for a shot over the hill. Very, very, it would be very unlucky to actually get hit there. I'm pretty sure he could, but it would be ridiculous to actually hit. But, you know, I guess just we'll take the brunt of it and we'll continue to try and have a good game. So we're up to 1,100 now with 900 assists, which is not bad. Obviously, you get assists pretty easy with this vehicle. All you have to do is basically poke ridges, poke areas. Don't, like, basically stay anywhere for too long. And now there is a T95. I'm thinking it's a bit risky going after this guy, but I'm hoping that the Panzerjäger will help me here. Basically, the intention is to go for him and then track this guy, and we're going to hopefully do that. So you can see me here. We're going for the track. So we track this guy. He's locked in place. We've got multiple tanks from behind. I'm going for the track again, and oh, for God's sake, no. Then he rolls for about 700. So we do survive. But it was a bit of a toss-up, a coin flip. The artillery is still aiming for me. He lands a shell behind me because he's a bot and terrible at the game. And so, well, he's not actually terrible, but you know what I mean. Always got to hate the artillery players. I myself am also an artillery player. So, you know, throwing stones in the glass house. But either way, we've had a pretty mediocre game, to be honest. So it's at this point where you can start really farming damage. Obviously, late game, as I say, that's where you can make or break your games. As long as you're active and you're trying to push that damage home and not just jumping into a cap circle. Because, you know, light tank cap circle, for some reason, they decide to do that. Even though you get more XP if you actually deal like double the damage than what you did before, even if you jump in the cap circle. So definitely, if you know that you're going to win in a situation where it's 9 versus 3, or make that 9 versus 2, don't get in the cap. There's literally no point. So 1600. Now let's go pen this Tiger Mowers for all of the damage that we possibly can. So let's get up to the side of him. We can take a little bit of time. We get further back to the engine of this guy, hoping for a fire. We don't manage to hit it, but we do 2.2k with 1,040 assistance damage. So a pretty okay result there, especially considering it is a more heavily focused map that can be more difficult. But it's all about that late game engagements. I want to stress that as much as possible. Obviously, get as much damage early as you possibly can, but don't do it at the risk of potentially getting hit, especially by higher alpha TDs and stuff like that. Just, you know, hold back a little bit, be more cautious in light tanks and this one in general, and you have a much better time. It is a really, really fun vehicle. I loved playing it. It was actually one of my favorite vehicles that I've played recently. Is it a good one? No, it isn't a good one. Can it be played really, really well? Absolutely. Can it have really outrageous games? Absolutely. But is it going to be great in the hands of like probably the majority of people in the game? Probably not. That you're going to see a lot of these tanks doing 500, 1,000 damage, you know, that sort of range. Maybe getting off 1 full clip, maybe 1.5 full clips of damage, and then it's pretty much curtains. So be aware of that if you are thinking about it, but I loved it. I found it a ton of fun, and it's great to have in the garage for when you want to pull out something a bit different and you're getting a bit bored of the game. I can definitely see myself jumping in this one to have a bit more fun. So thank you very much for watching. Obviously, that's the Squall. Hopefully you enjoyed. Make sure to like and subscribe. There's plenty more videos coming, and yeah, I've spent a lot of time recording loads and loads of videos, so we should have about 2 months worth of videos all recorded by the end of the week. We have already done 39, I think, at this point, so a couple more since yesterday. But yeah, I appreciate all your guys' time and viewership, and I really do appreciate it. You literally pay for the roof over my head, and I can't thank you any more than that. So thank you, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.